Hello, my darlings. Thank you guys so much for being a patron in the month of April 2019. This has been an absolutely crazy month of nonstop painting marathons, all-nighters, a really messed up sleep schedule. I am now pretty much completely nocturnal. But yeah, I just wanted to start off this podcast by thanking you guys for always being there for me, not just in supporting me on Patreon, but just encouraging me and giving me the strength and kind of motivation to just relax and keep moving forward. It's always a really stressful time building a huge collection of any sorts. I'm sure artists from all different scopes can relate, whether you're building like a solo show for a gallery or a collection of clothing if you're a fashion designer, or an album if you make music, anything, any sort of trade. As long as you're building a huge collection with one ultimate deadline, I think for a lot of us creative types, the last few weeks, the last month leading up to it is the most crucial, the most stressful, but also kind of where most of the magic happens. There's a little bit of inspiration and open-mindedness that comes with those last-minute chaotic moments, because you're kind of desperate for time and also more open to any idea because you're so desperate for time. You don't have time to second guess. You don't have time to doubt. All you can do is execute. So that's kind of what I've been doing this month. My mindset has just been execute. And I'm quite satisfied with some of the last minute changes or last minute progress that I've made while feeling stressed. I feel like I was able to really harness that desperation and panic into, a more open and a more, I would say, free way of painting and creating. So yeah, I think a huge part of that was also you guys. Like every time I shared my progress, or every time, like for example, during the live stream when I showed you guys the pieces so far, just the reaction from you guys gave me so much encouragement to keep going. So this is a very long introduction and very long thank you. But yeah, let's move on to the podcast. So for those of you joining me for the first time, I make one of these every month. They're about 40 minutes long, and I basically take this time to answer some of your questions that I posted on Patreon, or that you asked me on Patreon. And these podcasts are not edited. They're usually, I try to record them in one take, so they're just a very raw, candid, kind of more authentic conversation with you guys. This month, we only had 4 questions posted on Patreon, but no worries. That means I can answer each one very thoroughly. So let's begin with the first question from Lauren, who says, "Hi, Happy. You're one of my biggest inspirations. I just adore your work." Oh, thank you, Lauren. Now for my question. I was wondering if I'm ready to start with professional supplies. I'm not a beginner oil painter, but I am a beginner at learning how to be more realistic in my artwork, and painting is something I'm working on turning into a career. I've been trying to practice with beginner paints for realism, and it has not been working out. When I practice color mixing, my colors turn out really muddy and not the color that I need it to be. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong on my part or if it's just the paint that I'm working with. I'm practicing with detail brushes, and I've been loving them. I've been wanting to work with Gamblin for a while now, but I'm also trying not to rush myself because I'm not ready to put my ideas on canvas until I get more practice down. Any tips or thoughts? This is a really good question because the quality of art supplies is always something that is widely debated and widely, I guess, considered, because you can definitely argue for both sides of the coin in regards to am I ready yet for professional grade or slightly more expensive or higher quality art supplies, or should I stick to something cheaper, something student grade, because I'm maybe not at the level in my skill or in my career that seems to warrant expensive art supplies. My answer is going to be kind of vague in the sense I don't have a clear yes or no answer for you, because it really does depend on each individual artist. We all have different we're all ready at different times and we all have different budgets. So if you can afford professional artist grade materials, there's obviously more reason to go for it earlier, because I think higher quality materials, like there is a noticeable difference when it comes to especially certain colors with oil paints, like cadmium yellow medium, cadmium red medium. A lot of these, like when you get the artist grade, they're more expensive, but they are also richer and heavier in pigment, so they last longer and they look better when you paint because they have this like beautiful saturated opaque coverage. And there are certain effects that you just can't get with a cheaper brand because the paints are way too diluted with binders and they're just not the same richness. However, based on what I'm reading for your question, because you're saying that your situation is you've been practicing with beginner paints and it hasn't really been looking the way you like. However, you're still just practicing and you don't know if you're ready yet to make it into like a business. I would say strike a balance. Get a few colors that so it sounds like the current set of colors you're working with, like some of them are giving you problems. So maybe instead of switching all of your supplies to professional grade, just select a few important colors, or maybe the few colors that are currently giving you the most trouble, and upgrade those to a more professional line. But keep the colors that aren't giving you issues. And overall, I feel like if you are just practicing and you're not planning on selling your pieces, having a student grade or a more economic grade set of supplies is totally fine. These are pieces that you won't have to worry about how they'll preserve, if the colors will stay faithful. Like you don't have to worry about discoloration or damage or cracking or anything like that. So if you're just practicing, stay with a more budget-friendly set of supplies, especially if you're tight on budget. However, there are a few colors that I like. For example, I already talked about cadmium yellow medium and cadmium yellow medium that really do benefit from being of higher quality. So if you can afford it, splurge on a few, maybe like 2 or 3 colors. But usually for colors like black or white, like titanium white, I feel like even the student grade ones can work just fine. I feel like also if you're working on turning your oil paintings into a career, or working towards that route of going professional at some point, it does not hurt to invest in higher quality materials earlier on, because like I said, a little goes a long way when something's high quality, and you will be able to use that small bottle or small tube of oil paint for years and years. I splurged 5 years ago, actually 6 years ago, on a 140 milliliter. So that's like the standard tiny size. It looks like a travel kit toothpaste. Like it's a tiny, tiny size. It's the typical size you see in art stores of oil paints. So I splurged on one of those for cadmium red medium. And at the time it cost $25, and it was the most expensive tube of oil paint I had ever purchased. But like I had been struggling with my reds in my cheaper student grades for so long. I would pay like maybe less than $10 for a tube of student grade red, and it just never mixed the way I wanted to. It never gave me that like brilliant, beautiful red lipstick kind of red. It was always just kind of too diluted or too transparent or too maroon. It just never was that rich quintessential red. So I splurged on a tube of $25 cadmium red medium from Gamblin, and to this day I'm still using it. In fact, like in this oil painting that you're watching right now, all the red blush tones, her red lips, the tinges of red in the background, they're still made from that 6-year-old tube of cadmium red medium. So I wouldn't say like splurging on expensive art supplies is ever a waste, because even if you're not ready for it yet, even if you don't have clients yet who are going to benefit from, all the amazing pros of having a long-lasting archival quality, high quality paint, if you're still just practicing, that tube of paint won't go away. Like it'll be there ready for you to use and benefit from even when you do go professional. So yeah, ultimately pick a few colors that are giving you trouble, like with your current student grade, and upgrade those to professional grade, but keep the ones that are totally fine with a student grade. If I had to think of a few colors right off the bat, I would say like yellow ochre and burnt sienna. Those two colors really crucial for mixing like warm underpaintings or skin tones or beautiful like nature neutrals. Those like browns, yellows, or orangey browns, I thought were perfectly fine with my student grades. Also dark blues, so like what's one, like phthalo blue, Prussian blue, ultramarine blue. Those looked pretty good. Like purples as well, dioxazine purple. Those all looked fine in the student grade paints. The ones where the professional grade really makes a huge noticeable difference. Like I said, all the cadmium mediums, so cadmium red medium, cadmium yellow medium, the lights and darks versions of those color, like cadmium yellow light or cadmium red light or cadmium red deep, those are fine with student grades. But I think the mediums require so much more pigment, like it's so concentrated that you end up having to spend a lot of money because more pigment costs more money. Also, I feel like certain colors that you can't mix, I would recommend getting a higher quality artist grade. That beautiful mint green color that I always use for my Luna moths when I paint them, that one I cannot mix with, no matter like what combinations I've tried. I just can't get something that light and pastel to also be that saturated. So that one I had to splurge on a Gamblin Radiant Green. And yeah, I would say that's pretty much it for off the top of my head. If I think of any extra, I'll be sure to write it down. But those are the few that I would say are actually worth splurging on. So yeah, also before I end this question, you asked if you don't know if you're doing something wrong or if it's just the paint that you're working with. And I want to say that don't blame either one. Like don't be so quick to blame yourself or to blame the paint, and don't think of it as you're doing something wrong. Think of, especially practicing, think of it as a never-ending journey. Like there's never a right place that you can arrive at. It's a constant process of slowly teaching yourself, evolving, growing from your mistakes. But don't ever feel like you're doing something wrong because it doesn't look the way you want it to look. The process of making that mistake and recognizing that something doesn't look the way you want it to, like that is a win, because your taste and your eye and your way to critique and judge your own art is growing. So whenever you can point out that something doesn't look right, it means that you already have an idea of what right is supposed to look like. So regardless of what materials you're working with and regardless of where you are in your skill level, you always want to be able to look at your work and think, okay, this is where it looks off and this is where it looks right. So don't let the supplies get in the way or the lack of supplies get in the way. And don't think that just because you have the best supplies, the most expensive supplies, that things are going to magically fix themselves and look better. I would say like a beautiful piece of art ultimately requires skill first and then supplies. Like you can definitely still mix the colors that you need to make skin tones look realistic, even if you don't have artist grade supplies. But that being said, having artist grade supplies definitely helps you achieve certain effects with less struggle. It helps you kind of remove any mess or unnecessary mistakes that might be caused by not having the proper shade of certain colors. But ultimately, what's most important is your ability to critique your own work and point out areas that need to be fixed and improved, but also not discourage yourself or think that you're getting in your own way, because that self-reflection and self-critique is actually a great indicator that you're on the right path and that you're making good progress. So yeah, don't feel like you're doing something wrong. Just keep practicing and keep honing, and upgrade your supplies if you are able to, if you have the budget, and pick a few colors that you like. And I feel like it'll definitely be a pleasant surprise and it'll help you get to your goals more easily. Okay, next question is from Soknu. First of all, thank you for writing out how I'm supposed to pronounce your name. That really helps. I'm really sorry if I've ever butchered anyone's names in the past. I try my best. But Saknu says, "Hiya, Happy. Your artwork is really inspiring, and you're one of the main reasons I decided to try my hand at painting after spending half my life only admiring the beautiful paintings of others, thinking I could never paint something on my own." Oh, thank you. I'm so glad I could help you start your art journey and start enjoying the love and happiness that comes with painting. So I'm so glad I could help you get there. But Sakni's question is, when you started out or even now, did you ever start a project and really like it, but then on a second layer you feel like you messed it up and then gave up on it? Or do you just have faith in your vision and trust that your end goal will be achieved? I realize that in the early stages, a painting can be in a kind of ugly stage, but sometimes my mind defeats me and I'm fearful that it won't get better. This is why I have about 10 unfinished paintings, and my current project is at a point where I'm feeling insecure again. So the quick answer is yes, for sure. I've definitely started a project feeling super confident and hopeful, and then, when I actually begin the painting and realize how ugly it looks in the in progress state, I start feeling discouraged, and sometimes I've definitely abandoned works or just started over. So short answer is yes, but my long answer is you definitely have to just make peace with the fact that your artwork, especially in the early stages, is going to look very unfinished. It's going to look very far from your vision, and you're just going to have to put a lot of blind faith. It's kind of like what you asked, like, do you have faith in your vision and trust that it'll be okay in the end? Like, yes, you just have to blindly trust that it'll be okay in the end. I think I've said this before, and I definitely, it still applies, but for me at least, my art in my eyes looks rough and unfinished and ugly about 90% of the entire progress. So up until the very last stage where I'm just adding the final details, to me, there's always going to be something that jumps out that makes me cringe, that makes me, doubt myself, makes me wonder if I'll ever get it looking good. So for about 90% of the time, I'm just trying to ignore or like pretend that the unfinished parts aren't there and just kind of blindly trust in my vision and tell myself that I'll get to the end goal. And I think what helps me over time, what makes it easier for me to ignore just that unfinished ugliness, is the more paintings you do, the more like real facts and real data you have to back up that blind faith. So for me, like at this point, oh gosh, I don't even know, but I guess since I started doing art full time, I've probably done at least over 100 paintings, probably around 200 or 300 if I'm calculating correctly. But let's just say I've done 100 paintings. So like the first 5, I'm just not sure how they'll turn out. Like the first 5 were like so difficult. Also, first of all, I didn't really have a vision when I first started painting. I was kind of more like starting off with just a face, and then I had no clue what colors I wanted for the background or how I wanted the painting to look. So I didn't even have a vision to fall back on for any sort of self-motivation. I just had to keep painting and experimenting, and oftentimes I would like repaint the entire background and like just paint it with white and start over. Because I was just so unhappy with like where my experimentation took me. Like there have been so many pieces back in 2014 where I remember I started like with a warm color palette, planning to do all these florals and warm tropical plants and backgrounds, and then I ended up repainting everything, including the subject, with like black and white to make it completely desaturated and monotone, and then I would repaint it with like blue because I'd changed my mind and decided everything should be blue and ocean themed. So after enough instances of wasting time doing that, I started realizing I should probably plan my pieces more. So maybe paintings like 10 through 30, I actually had a rough idea of the colors I wanted without planning out any small details. And then when I had a rough idea of the color palette I wanted, and also learned from my past mistakes of what colors don't mix together or what colors don't look good together, I started being less and less bothered or intimidated by that in-between stage. And then paintings like 50 through 100, I've had more detailed plans. It doesn't have to even be like, a small mini painting or a study or even a digital color mock-up. It could just be a plan that you have in your mind because you've painted so much and you know what looks good, and you know what you're good at painting, and you know what compositions feel good to your eye. Just through practice, it becomes like muscle memory, it becomes like instinct. So having a more solid plan also helped me overcome that in-between stage, because I knew that it was an in-between stage. I knew the steps it would take to overcome that stage and get to the final product. So I would say my advice to, like not letting that ugly stage handicap you is to just paint more, because the more you paint, the more like facts and the more real data you have to back up, your blind faith. Like if you've overcome it many times before, you're more confident that you overcome it now. And then the second biggest tip is to just give yourself a bit more of a plan. If you have a more solidified vision and a more detailed, reliable blueprint of how to get to that vision, you'll be less intimidated by the ugly stage. The ugly stage will feel like just one step in the entire process rather than the ultimate end game roadblock. But I also want to point out that I don't think there's anything wrong with having like 10 unfinished pieces. There have been many times where I've abandoned paintings for years and they've just sat there. And actually, I still have like 2 or 3 paintings that are unfinished that I haven't touched. But it's very common for me to go back and revisit abandoned, unfinished works months or years later, and have a random surge of inspiration and actually be able to finish those pieces. So don't see your abandoned, unfinished paintings as paintings that are for sure going to be abandoned forever. Like, it's not a nail in the coffin by any means. There's always a chance that in the future, when you've practiced more, when you've painted more, when you've found your a comfortable aesthetic or found your own voice more, that you'll go back and revisit those pieces with a lot more confidence and conviction and a lot more skills to get to the vision that you want. Oh, looks like we have 5 questions, not 4 questions as I normally thought. Good job, Happy. You're so good at counting. But anyways, the third question is from Isabel, who says, is it ever too late to start painting? I've always been really creative and I have so many ideas in my head, but I've never had the confidence to really practice. I'm 19 and I really want to make interesting and high quality art, but I feel like I've waited too long to start painting. Okay, first of all, 19 is really young. You have your whole life ahead of you. I'm not trying to age shame you by any means. I'm not trying to say like, oh my gosh, you're 19, what do you know? Like, definitely not, because I feel like even though I'm in my late 20s, I feel like mentally sometimes I'm still a teenager. But I just want to say like 19, like you would be surprised at how much time you have. It's really not too late at all. In fact, I don't think 19 or 30 or 40 or 50 is even too late to start painting. You always hear stories of, seniors who go back to get their bachelor's degree or their high school diploma at, after they've retired. You hear of people like starting to work out and work on their fitness in their 50s. You've heard of, the best example is probably Grandma Moses, who is one of the most famous American artists, and she didn't start painting until her 80s. Painted way into, I think she lived to be 100 or close to 100 or over 100, but she still painted for many years after she started at age 80. So it's never too late in your life to do anything, in my opinion, but especially art. I think art, one of my favorite things about art is that you can do it way into your, into old age. I hope to be painting until I'm an old lady on my deathbed. Like, I would just make a bed easel and paint like Frida Kahlo did when she was bedridden. But it's not like a sport, like a professional sport where you have to train your body from an early age and, you know, make sure your joints grow a certain way. Painting, like all you need is your hands, your eyesight, and some sort of vision or love for your craft. So 19 is definitely not too late to start painting. In fact, I didn't start painting, like oil painting at least, until way after. Like I had dabbled in some Bob Ross tutorials when I was 13 for like, I don't know, a few months. I don't really count that because like I didn't really learn or like seriously put any effort in. I just kind of like watched his videos and, you know, made some really, really crappy paintings. But I didn't start actually trying to learn and practice every day and get better and like have an end goal in mind to be an oil painter until I was in my mid 20s. So I started way later than you. 19 is definitely not too late. And if anyone out there listening is older than that, like if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, again, I just want to reiterate, I don't think it's too late because the progress that I made in just like the last 5 years has been so much more influential and impactful and meaningful and valuable than the progress I made my entire life just doing art as a kid. Because the last 5 years I really focused, like I practiced with intent and I put everything into it and I was serious about it. So I think what's important is not how many years you had a head start, but rather how you make those years count. Like if you practice diligently and with you know, a lot of passion and enthusiasm and diligence and good work ethic, you could do more in a year, like make more progress in 1 year starting, you know, as an adult than you can if you had started in middle school or elementary school just doodling for fun a little bit, you know, sparingly. Like, so I don't think you should ever feel like it's too late to do anything. And as long as, like you said, you've been a creative person, you have all these great ideas, all you need is that confidence to start painting. But like confidence is built. Like confidence is something, at least to me, it's not just something that you can magically have. Like we can all say we're confident and we can fake it till we make it. But I think real confidence, like I said in the answer to the previous question, real confidence that actually gives you the motivation and gives you the faith and the kind of self-confidence, it's rooted in fact. It's rooted in data. So like if you've practiced and you've proven to yourself that you can keep going, that you have the work ethic, you have the vision, you have the motivation, that will only snowball into more and more confidence. So I would say like, don't wait, like don't let anything hold you back, whether it's your age, your time, your abilities, just start doing it, like start painting and start practicing. And the more you practice, the more confident you'll get over time. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Isabel. Oh my gosh, this next question is so adorable. It's from GBS Boy, and it's a really short question. It's, how do you glaze while following the fat over lean rule? High five. I love it. I love how he just ends with high five. Okay, so real quick summary. Fat over lean is basically like, you've probably heard this before if you've like watched or read oil painting tutorials. It's something that people say. It's a very common saying now in the oil painting community. Fat equals higher oil content. Lean equals lower oil content. And so when you're painting oil paints, you want your first initial layers to have lower oil content. So that means you mix more paint thinner. Or like a thinner layer of oil paint. And then your layers above, like your second, third, fourth layers, should be fatter. So they should contain less paint thinner and more oil content. So I'm talking about like mediums that have oil content. So linseed oil, flax oil, safflower oil. Personally, I actually don't think about this rule a lot because when I first started oil painting and I kept thinking about it, it just added too much like science and too much procedure into an already complicated method. Like oil paint oil painting is pretty complicated already, especially if you're just starting out. It's very daunting, and having to keep this fat over lean rule in my head was too confusing, especially because I didn't even know much about what mediums I was supposed to use, let alone try to measure out like how much of each medium I'm having like built up over the layers, and how like it was just too much. So I would say, to answer your question though, to glaze while following fat over lean, so fat equals more oil, lean equals less oil. If you're glazing, you should definitely glaze with more oil. So glazing is like adding a lot of medium and a small amount of oil paint to create a sheer semi-transparent layer of that color to give like a tinge, a luminous sheer tinge of that color. So use a medium that's high in oil content, like I mentioned before, like flaxseed oil, linseed oil, safflower oil are just a few examples, and then use that to glaze over a previous layer that's already dry. Make sure your previous layer is dry, because otherwise the glazing will become blending and it might end up messing up your layer. So make sure your initial layer is dry, use a medium that's high in oil content, and use a little bit of oil paint and glaze that way. However, for me personally, I usually avoid using medium whenever possible. So for my oil, my first underpainting layers, I just use Gamsol and oil paint. And then building up the second and third layers, I like to increase my opacity and create more coverage. So I just use oil paints without any mediums. The only times I use mediums are if I have to glaze or if I have to make the paint easier to work with, like if the paint is dry. But usually I like to time my progress in a way that I can just use fresh paint out of the tube and just lay down fresh paint. Like fresh paint out of the tube when it's freshly mixed and hasn't had time to dry is already pretty easy to work with usually. And if it's not, if it's like a certain color that's just really, really tacky and dry by nature, I add as little medium as possible, like a very, very small amount. And I usually like to use fast drying mediums that don't have as much oil content, because higher oil content usually makes your piece dry slower. And I'm always impatient and want faster results. So I use currently Galkid gel, which I just mix like as little as possible, like a drop of it, just to make the paint a little more viscous. And after that, I pretty much paint with it. And then whenever I need to glaze, instead of glazing with oil mediums, I just glaze with my Galkid gel or a Galkid gel equivalent. And as long as the layer underneath is dry, I don't have to really worry about fat over lean. Fat over lean basically ensures that you're not messing up layers underneath that are still wet with newer, let me just rephrase this. Fat over lean ensures that your top layer is not drying faster than your bottom layer. So imagine like if you have a bottom layer that's still like half wet, like the inside is still gooey, and then you put a top layer over it that dries instantly or dries really quickly. And the top layer dries first, but after that, the bottom layer will slowly dry and it might expand and then cause the top layer to crack. Kind of like if you're painting your nails and your nails aren't really dry yet, but you put like an overcoat on top of it and it cracks. So oil paint's the same way. You don't want it to crack, and you don't want the bottom layer's drying time to be slower than your top layers. However, for me, because I don't really use mediums or try to avoid it, and I always make sure that my under layers are completely dry before glazing on top of it, I don't really have to think or worry about that issue that much. So I just try to avoid like overcomplicating my process whenever possible, and because of that, I don't really think about fat over lean. So I don't know if this answers your question, but these are just my personal tips. So for those of you listening out there who do want to use more high oil content mediums, or find like an equivalent high content or high oil content medium, or do want to follow the fat over lean, like I'm not saying that your method is worse or wrong by any means. Like this is just my personal preference. Every artist has their own set of preferences and their own progress that works best for them. So but yeah, just my personal opinion is following the fat over lean rule can be avoided if you just make sure your like your first layer is dry before putting on a second layer. And glazing you can accomplish with a fast drying medium that doesn't have high oil content. You can also even glaze with a dry brush, or like achieve a similar effect with a dry brush. So if you have like a completely dry frayed brush and you put a tiny amount, like just dust a little bit of paint on it, and then like kind of dry or like spread that paint around like on a dry paper towel, so that there's just a very small amount evenly coated on your brush, and then you kind of like brush it over in like small circle patterns over a completely dry layer. You can achieve the same effect of like a semi-transparent layer of oil paint to tinge a certain color. You can do that without any mediums. So yeah, that's the beauty of oil painting. There's so many different ways to accomplish the effects you want. Okay, the last question is from Morella, who says, "Hi Happy, as the solo show gets closer, you must be getting more nervous, and I know you told us about your ups and downs during this time. How do you overcome the feeling down moments, and how do you cope with it?" Well, thank you for asking this question. This is really relevant, and I'm really excited to answer it and hopefully help you guys avoid my pitfalls. My best advice on dealing with the down moments is to recognize why you feel down and to think about it logically. I remember there was one night where I was pulling like my third consecutive all-nighter. I was sleep deprived. I was feeling so stressed. I was crying, and I was messaging my friend, one of my best friends, and telling her about how crappy I felt. And she said, like, "Why are you doing this to yourself? Why don't you go to sleep right now? Go rest. Like, you're so tired. Go rest." And I said, "I can't. I only have, X many days left. I don't have a choice. I don't think I'm making enough progress on my pieces, and they won't look as good as I want them to by the show deadline. I don't have a choice. I have to keep up with this all-nighter." And she said something that I will always remember. She's like, "You always have a choice." She's like, "You're choosing to repaint this thing over and over again because you're like being a perfectionist and, work like slaving away, wasting all these hours and lacking sleep over little details that only you would probably notice or only you care about." She's like, "What's the worst that could happen if you decide to just go to sleep right now and take a day off and rest?" She's like, "You might not have your pieces looking perfect the way you want them to, but like they're still gonna be done and people will still like them. Like you're your own worst critic. And also like, so what if you like miss one piece? What if like you promised the gallery, X number of pieces and you're off by one because you were too tired and, couldn't finish as fast as possible? Like, are you going to get arrested? Are people going to hate you? Like, she's like, what's the worst that could happen if you just took care of your health right now? And that really struck a chord with me because I realized like all the times I felt down or stressed or paralyzed by how stressed I was, like it was all just kind of me making the situation worse by getting in my head and letting those crazy, chaotic, panicking thoughts overrule my calm side. So nowadays, like when I'm feeling down, I just ask myself like, why am I sad? Why am I stressed? Why am I panicking or, discouraged? Like, is it something that I can control, or is it something that's just kind of in my head that I've made worse by constantly like feeding myself those negative, toxic thoughts? So whenever I can take a step back and think about why I'm feeling down, and just like it helps to have friends who can remind you. So I've actually asked a few of my closest friends to snap me out of my moods. I get in these like really stressed out panic moods and I'm just like paralyzed and can't work, or too overworked and I'm delirious. So have people close to you, like take a breath and remind yourself and ask yourself logically, why do you feel down and what can you do to fix it? And what's honestly the worst that could happen if things don't go right? Because, things in life never go perfectly and we'll make mistakes. Like I said, shit happens. That's a common, very popular saying that I love because it's like, yeah, sometimes shit happens. Sometimes there's things out of your control. And if that happens, like what is really the worst that could happen? There's really nothing so bad that would occur that you can't bounce back from, that you can't forgive yourself or be forgiven for. So most of the time I realize like when I feel down, it's all in my head. It's all me being too hard on myself or, making something seem way worse than it actually is. And whenever I can recognize that or someone else can help me recognize that, it's it does wonders for calming me down and, kind of putting my head back in the game. All right, and this wraps up April's podcast. Thank you guys for being such an awesome Patreon family. One last quick reminder, the show is May 18th in LA, and if you can't make it there, I will be thinking of you guys in spirit, and I can't wait to see you all next month. Bye, love you.